The sun had barely begun to rise over the rugged mesas, painting the horizon in streaks of gold and crimson, when Ilara felt the weight of the orders pressed upon her like a stone in her chest. The fort was quiet in the early hour, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the tall prairie grass. Soldiers moved about with deliberate purpose, their boots crunching on the dirt, but none of them looked at her. None of them could understand what was coming. She had been summoned for a task no one else dared to imagine, a task that sent a shiver down her spine and made her heart pound with a mixture of fear and curiosity. To bathe the fiercest Apache warrior the army had ever captured was a command that seemed impossible. They called him Iron Hawk, a name whispered with awe and dread throughout the fort. Tales of his bravery, his relentless spirit, and the fire in his eyes traveled faster than any messenger could. Many had tried to face him, and all had stepped back, humbled or worse. Ilara tightened the folds of her worn dress, feeling the rough fabric scrape against her skin. She had grown up in the shadow of these mesas, familiar with their wild beauty and their hidden dangers, but nothing had prepared her for this. She was young, yet she carried a quiet strength, a sharp mind that often caught officers by surprise. Still, even she wondered if courage alone could carry her through what awaited in the dim, stone-walled cell where Iron Hawk was held. As she approached the guarded enclosure, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation. A scent of wood, smoke, sweat, and something wilder, untamed, wrapped around her senses. Her hands trembled slightly, though she refused to show it. Every step closer to him felt like walking a knife's edge between awe and terror. And then she saw him. Iron Hawk was unlike any man she had ever known. His hair fell in a cascade of black waves, framing a face carved with the hardships of battle and the strength of mountains. His eyes, dark as midnight and yet bright with an inner fire, held a challenge that made her stomach twist. He did not flinch at her approach, did not even blink. He simply studied her as if trying to unravel her spirit before she could touch the water. Ilara felt a strange pull, a magnetic tension that left her both frightened and inexplicably drawn to him. The soldiers guarding him stepped back, casting her a wary glance that urged her forward and warned her to retreat at the same time. She carried the basin of warm water in her arms, careful not to spill a single drop. Every movement felt exaggerated in the quiet of the early morning, every breath measured against the pounding of her heart. Iron Hawk watched her, still unmoving, and Ilara sensed that this moment was not just about obedience or duty. It was a crossing of worlds, two lives brushing against the impossible. She knelt before him, letting the basin rest on the ground. Her hands hovered over the water, unsure whether to start, as if the weight of history itself pressed upon her. He spoke then, his voice low, gravelly, yet carrying a resonance that made her catch her breath. "Do you fear me, girl?" he asked, and she realized he did not look for an answer. He wanted to see it, feel it in her very being. "I do not fear what I must do," she replied, though her voice wavered. Courage, she reminded herself, was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint clatter of the fort beyond the walls. Iron Hawk shifted slightly, his movements deliberate, and for a heartbeat, Ilara felt as if she were stepping into a story older than the mesas themselves, a story of fire and water, of trust and defiance. As she dipped her hands into the basin, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers, she noticed the scars that marked his body lines and shapes that told tales of battles, of nights under the stars, of survival where others had fallen. There was a raw honesty in him, a truth that no one else had ever dared to witness. And though the task before her seemed simple in words, it became clear that it was more than washing a man. It was a ritual of understanding, of connection, of glimpsing a soul few had the courage to see. The wind shifted outside, carrying whispers of the plains and the distant cry of a hawk, and Ilara's heart raced with an anticipation she could neither name nor resist. She knew that what she was about to discover could change everything the way she saw him, herself, and the fragile, burning world that stretched beyond the fort's walls. Iron Hawk's gaze never left hers, and in that moment a silent challenge passed between them. Neither spoke, yet words were unnecessary. He was fierce, unyielding, and yet, somehow, she sensed a depth of longing, of untold stories hidden beneath layers of pride and pain. and she, in turn, felt the stirrings of emotions she had never expected to encounter in this harsh, sun-scorched land, a mixture of admiration, fear, and something far more potent, something that could ignite a fire she had no instructions on controlling. As her hands touched the first ripple of water, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara realized she was stepping into a story that no one else would witness, a moment that defied the boundaries of fear, duty, and the known. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to retreat to the safety of the fort, yet something deeper urged her onward. And then, just as she began, he moved in a way that made her catch her breath, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that shifted the tension, hinting at a trust that had never been offered to anyone before. In that heartbeat, she understood that this was only the beginning. The bath, the task, the orders, they were mere gateways to something far more profound. Ilara's pulse quickened, the basin trembling in her hands. She looked into his eyes and saw a storm beneath the calm surface, a storm she was about to face and perhaps the only one brave enough to stand beside it. Before she could take the next step, a sudden shout echoed from the fort, a warning or perhaps an intrusion. Iron Hawk's head snapped toward the sound, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The moment shattered, leaving Ilara suspended between fear and fascination, duty and desire. And in that suspended breath, she realized that nothing would ever be the same. What she had seen, what she was about to see, was a truth no one else had dared to uncover. And for the first time, she understood that courage was only half the battle, the other half was the heart. The shout from the fort lingered in the air, fading slowly, but it left a tension that seemed to wrap itself around Ilara like a second skin. Iron Hawk's muscles tightened, his body coiled with the precision of a predator who had spent years reading danger in the wind. She could almost feel his pulse through the distance between them, steady and commanding, yet charged with something untamed. Ilara swallowed hard, trying to steady her own racing heart. She had known fear before, but this was different. It was a magnetic, sharp-edged fear that drew her closer even as it warned her to retreat. The first time she had heard his name, Iron Hawk had been little more than a story whispered around campfires and in hushed tones along the fort's corridors. Tales of his daring raids, his unyielding defiance, and his uncanny ability to vanish like smoke had painted him as a force beyond reckoning. But those stories could not capture what stood before her now. He was real, alive, and watching her with an intensity that left her both trembling and intrigued. She realized how small the world felt when measured against the presence of someone like him. Ilara thought of her childhood, growing up along the jagged cliffs and open plains, learning to read the signs in the land, the wind, the flight of hawks. She had been taught to respect the land and the people who moved within it. And she had learned early that courage alone was not enough. Wisdom, intuition, and patience were just as vital. Perhaps it was that training that gave her the steadiness to kneel before Iron Hawk, to hold the basin of water without spilling it, despite the storm of emotions swirling in her chest. He finally shifted, his dark eyes following every motion of her hands. There was a quiet authority in the way he moved, a rhythm that suggested he had fought countless battles, seen countless betrayals, yet trusted no one without reason. And yet, now, in this vulnerable, intimate moment, he allowed her presence. It was a permission rarely granted, and Ilara felt the weight of it like a delicate flame she had to protect from the wind. The fort beyond remained silent, the distant echo of footsteps fading into the background. For a moment, it was only the two of them, two worlds colliding, the disciplined, orderly life of the fort and the fierce, wild freedom of the plains. Embodied in Iron Hawk, Ilara felt a tug in her chest, a pull toward something she could neither name nor resist. The warmth of the water, the heat of the morning sun, and the raw intensity of his gaze combined to create a moment suspended in time. Iron Hawk finally spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "Why have you been chosen for this?" he asked. His question was not accusatory but probing, as if he were seeking to understand not just her duty but her very essence. Ilara hesitated. She could have given the official answer, the one the officers expected, but it felt hollow here, under his watchful eyes. "Because they believe I am strong enough to face what others fear," she said. The words sounded braver than she felt. "And because I do not run from what must be done." His eyes softened just slightly. and she caught a flicker of something almost imperceptible, a curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of her courage. Then it vanished, replaced by the unyielding presence she had first seen. He shifted, and the scars on his shoulders and arms caught the sunlight. Each one a story etched into skin, a history written in battles survived and nights endured beneath the open sky. Ilara's mind wandered to the stories she had heard as a girl, the ones her grandmother had whispered, about warriors who were both feared and admired, men who carried the weight of their tribes in the land itself. She had always wondered what it would be like to meet such a soul, to see not just the legend but the person behind the tales. Now she realized she was standing in the presence of exactly that. She dipped her fingers into the warm water again, letting it ripple softly before lifting her hands and letting the liquid cascade over his skin. Iron Hawk did not flinch. He did not speak. He simply watched, an inscrutable expression that made her pulse pound in her ears. There was a trust forming here, fragile and tentative, yet powerful. And with it came a connection that neither duty nor fear could fully explain. The wind carried a scent of sage and dust, and Ilara felt a memory stirred deep within her, of nights spent under the stars, the firelight dancing across the faces of those she loved, of laughter and stories shared in the hush of twilight. And now this strange, impossible intimacy with a man whose life had been measured in battles and survival felt like a new chapter unfolding before her eyes. Iron Hawk finally spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Few have seen me like this," he said, almost a whisper. "Few have dared to stand close enough to touch the world I carry." Ilara's heart skipped. She did not fully understand the weight of his words, but she felt it all the same. She realized that she was not just washing him. She was witnessing the hidden layers of a life lived on the edge of survival, a story of courage and pain, and perhaps something more. Something no one else had ever dared to uncover. The basin trembled slightly in her hands, her grip tightening instinctively, and Iron Hawk's eyes flicked to it. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, almost imperceptible, like a secret shared between them alone. In that moment, the tension shifted subtly, the air thick with unspoken possibilities, a delicate balance between fear, fascination, and desire. Suddenly, a distant rumble reached them, the sound of hooves on the trail beyond the fort. Ilara froze. She had been so absorbed in the moment that she had forgotten the world outside this fragile space. Iron Hawk's eyes snapped toward the sound, sharp and alert, muscles coiling like a spring ready to release. "Trouble," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His hand brushed against hers as he shifted, a fleeting contact that sent warmth rushing through her in a way she could not ignore. Ilara's breath caught. There was a tension here that went beyond danger. It was charged with something intimate, something forbidden, yet undeniably real. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing across the dusty plain. Iron Hawk's gaze swept over her, and she sensed a silent question, a warning, and an invitation all at once. She had no idea what was coming, what danger or revelation awaited, but she knew that once this moment ended, nothing could ever remain the same. Her hands hovered over the basin again, unsure whether to continue or retreat. Iron Hawk's presence was overwhelming, a storm contained in a single body, and yet there was an odd, unspoken tenderness in the way he allowed her to be near him. Ilara realized that courage alone would not guide her through what lay ahead. Intuition, trust, and perhaps a kind of recklessness born of curiosity and desire would be needed too. As the sound of the approaching riders grew nearer, the morning sun cast long shadows across the cell, and Ilara felt the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. She looked into Iron Hawk's eyes once more and saw not just a warrior, but a man who had survived worlds far harsher than hers. A man whose life and heart were as wild and untamed as the plains themselves. And in that suspended moment, she understood that this was only the beginning. The bath, the task, the orders, they were gateways to something far greater, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than she could have imagined. The stirrings of trust and something deeper, something intimate, hovered between them like a fragile flame waiting to be fanned into life. The riders were almost upon them now. Ilara's pulse raced. Iron Hawk's body tensed, ready to spring into action. Yet, in the midst of the approaching chaos, there was a quiet intimacy, A fragile bond that had formed in the few minutes they had shared, a connection that neither could ignore. And as the first hoofbeats thundered against the earth outside, Ilara realized that what she was about to see next, what they would face together, was something no other eyes had ever dared to witness, a truth that could change both of their lives forever. The hoofbeats drew closer, pounding across the dry earth like distant thunder. Ilara's hands trembled over the basin, but she forced herself to remain steady. Ironhawk's dark eyes scanned the shadows beyond the cell bars, his jaw tightening as the figures came into view. They were not soldiers of the fort, but a small band of riders from the plains, faces hidden beneath scarves, their intentions impossible to read. Ilara felt a sharp pang of fear and curiosity. She had never seen anyone move across the open land with such precision, such silence, and yet the rhythm of their approach carried a subtle menace. Ironhawk's hand brushed hers again, quick and fleeting, as if grounding her in the moment. It was a contact that spoke of trust, of silent acknowledgement that whatever was coming, they would face it together. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her chest. "And do not falter. The wrong move could mean more than your life." Her breath caught, but she nodded, feeling a strange confidence in the presence of someone so fierce. She had always believed courage meant standing alone, yet here it seemed intertwined with someone else's strength, someone who embodied both danger and protection. The riders halted just beyond the outer fence of the fort, their horses pawing at the dust. Ironhawk's eyes narrowed. "They're scouts," he muttered. "Not looking for a fight yet, but testing the edges." His gaze swept over her, dark and unreadable, and Ilara realized he was assessing her too, not for skill or obedience, but for resilience. Could she hold her ground when chaos broke loose? Could she match a fraction of the instinct that had kept him alive all these years? A sudden thought struck her. What if the orders she had been given, the mission she had followed blindly, were entangled with secrets she could not yet see? Rumors of hidden alliances, whispers of betrayal within the fort, and the relentless drive to capture or control Ironhawk suddenly seemed part of a much larger puzzle. And she, caught in the center, could either be a pawn or a key. The morning wind stirred, carrying dust and the faint scent of smoke from distant fires. Ilara's mind raced, trying to piece together what she knew. The fort commanders were cautious around Ironhawk, never fully trusting him, yet relying on him when danger pressed from the outside. The Apache warrior had his own code, one that no one in the fort could fully grasp, and that made him both a threat and an enigma. She had glimpsed his humanity in the quiet moments, yet the fire in his gaze reminded her that his world was one of survival and power, not submission or obedience. As she lifted the basin again, she felt the tension in the room shift. Ironhawk's posture had become a coiled readiness, muscles taut, eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. His life was lived on the razor's edge, and now, for the first time, she realized she had stepped onto that edge with him. There was no turning back. Ilara thought of her own life, of her family, and the small, predictable routines of the fort. She had always felt out of place, yearning for a sense of purpose that went beyond chores and quiet obedience. And now, faced with a man whose every step carried history, courage, and danger, she sensed that purpose had found her. The question was whether she could survive it. The riders stirred again, a signal, and Ironhawk tensed visibly. "They know I am here," he said, his voice almost a growl. "They are testing loyalties, looking for weakness," Ilara's heart thumped. She had heard whispers of rival Apache bands, of scouts sent to monitor movements, but never had she imagined being this close to the unfolding web of alliances and threats. And now she realized that whatever happened, she could not remain merely an observer. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping along the outer wall of the fort, unseen by the other guards. Ilara froze. Could this be a spy, a traitor sent to test Ironhawk's resolve? Or was it something else entirely, a messenger of danger too subtle for ordinary eyes to detect? She glanced at Ironhawk. His gaze followed hers, sharp and focused. "Do you see him?" he asked, a hint of admiration in the tone that made her stomach twist. "Yes," she whispered. Her hands gripped the basin more tightly. "He's there, moving fast, almost like the wind itself." Ironhawk's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. Good, your eyes are sharper than most here. The words carried a warmth she had not expected, a fleeting intimacy that sent a shiver across her skin. Even in the midst of looming conflict, there was a thread of connection, a recognition that their fates were intertwined in ways neither could fully understand. The shadow paused, and Elara caught the glint of a blade beneath the fabric of a cloak. She swallowed, feeling a sudden surge of protective instinct, not for the orders, not for the fort, but for the man whose trust she had earned in a matter of moments. Ironhawk's eyes flicked toward the same figure, and in that instant, Elara understood something fundamental about him. He could read danger not just in movement, but in intent, in subtle shifts of energy that others overlooked. The scout hesitated, as if aware that he had been seen. Then, with a swift motion, he vanished again into the terrain beyond the fort walls. Ironhawk's hands clenched, the tension radiating outward, yet he did not speak. Elara realized he was weighing the next move, calculating the ripple effects of a single action. And she, kneeling beside him, felt the weight of every choice, every decision that could tip the balance between safety and disaster. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the legends of the plain stories of warriors and women, of forbidden alliances, of hearts caught between survival and desire. And now she understood that she was living one of those stories, that the quiet bravery she had carried all her life was being tested in ways she had never imagined. The danger was real, the attraction undeniable, and the stakes higher than she could have guessed. Ironhawk finally spoke again, his voice low, deliberate. They will test patience first, then courage. And sometimes the heart. His gaze lingered on hers, unflinching, and Elara felt an unspoken promise, a silent warning and a flicker of something far more intimate. The connection between them was no longer accidental, it had become part of the tension, part of the risk, part of the very fabric of the morning. The distant riders shifted again, a subtle ripple in the grass indicating that they were preparing to move closer. Ironhawk's eyes darkened. We will not wait for them to act, he said. Every second counts, every choice matters, Elara nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, she sensed that her life and his were entwined in a battle that was larger than either of them, a game of power, survival, and something profoundly human that neither orders nor legends could fully contain. A hawk cried from above, its wings cutting the sky in a silent arc. Elara's gaze followed it, and in that instant she understood why he was called Ironhawk. The name was not just for the battles he had fought or the enemies he had faced. It was for the freedom in his spirit, the precision in his mind, and the depth of his heart. And now, that same spirit was entwined with hers in a delicate, dangerous dance, one that could ignite passion and peril in equal measure. As she adjusted the basin once more, preparing to continue, she felt a stirring deep inside, a mixture of anticipation and dread, of curiosity and something tender that she could not name. The world outside the cell seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, the shadowed riders, and the fragile thread of connection that had been spun between them. And as the first rider broke from the distant cover of the hills, heading toward the fort, Elara realized that nothing would remain the same. The Bathe, the orders, the danger, all were mere precursors to a larger conflict, one that demanded courage, trust, and a heart brave enough to face the unknown. Her fingers hovered over the water, her gaze locked with Ironhawk's. In that suspended moment, she knew that whatever came next, it would test everything she believed about duty, desire, and destiny. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible, and the story that had begun with a simple command to bathe a warrior was about to explode into something far greater, far more perilous and far more unforgettable. The morning had grown hotter, the sun beating down on the fort, and the surrounding plains with relentless intensity. Dust swirled around the distant riders, now clearly scouting the perimeter, their presence a constant, threatening pulse. Elara could feel it in her bones, the tension, the waiting, the sense that, at any moment, the fragile balance could shatter. She glanced at Ironhawk. He stood like a shadowed mountain, silent and alert, every movement deliberate, every sense honed to the smallest detail. Her hands hovered over the basin again, but she no longer felt fear. Instead, there was a fierce awareness, a determination that matched his own. She had stepped into a world where ordinary rules no longer applied, where courage and instinct intertwined with survival, trust, and a strange, budding intimacy she could not yet name. Iron Hawk's gaze shifted to the horizon, dark eyes narrowing. "They will try to lure us out?" he said, voice low, like gravel sliding over stone. "Patience is our weapon, and understanding is our shield." The words held more than advice. They were a test, a challenge, and a promise. Ilara felt her pulse quicken, knowing that every second they waited increased both danger and the unspoken connection between them. The riders circled slowly, testing the fort's defenses. Ilara noticed the patterns in their movements, the subtle signals between them. Her instincts, sharpened by years in the open plains, told her that the danger was more than brute force. It was strategy, cunning, and calculation. She caught a glimpse of Iron Hawk's jawline, taut and rigid, and realized that while he had faced countless battles before, this moment demanded more than skill. It demanded complete trust between them. She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of vulnerability. There was none. Only the fire of a man who had survived every test life had thrown at him, who had risen from the wild with a strength few could comprehend. And yet, beneath the surface, she sensed something else, a quiet, unspoken longing, a recognition that she was not just another presence in his life, but someone who had entered a sacred space no one else had dared to touch. A sudden rustle near the outer fence broke the silence. Ilara froze. Iron Hawk's body tensed, a coiled power ready to strike. The riders had moved again, closer this time, their intentions more obvious. They were probing, testing the fort's defenses, and perhaps most dangerously, trying to gauge his reaction. Ilara's heart raced, but she did not pull back. She realized, with a sharp clarity, that the danger itself had brought them closer not just physically, but emotionally. The basin of water trembled slightly in her hands as she adjusted it, a symbolic act of control in the midst of chaos. She had begun to understand that her task, simple as it seemed on paper, was a ritual of connection, of mutual recognition. Every ripple of water, every glance shared between her and Iron Hawk, carried meaning beyond words. The external threat magnified it, sharpened it, made it undeniable. Iron Hawk crouched slightly, eyes scanning, muscles rippling under his skin. "They will make mistakes," he murmured, "and we will take advantage of them. But only if we remain calm." His voice was steady, commanding, yet there was an undercurrent of intimacy that made Ilara's chest tighten. She could feel it in the warmth of his presence, in the faint brush of air as he shifted near her. She had never felt so alive, so acutely aware of another human being, and so drawn to someone who could have crushed her with a thought. The riders hesitated, and in that pause, Ilara noticed something, a subtle change in their formation, a signal that betrayed their communication. Her instincts screamed at her. She lifted her voice, steady despite the heat and tension. "They are moving to split the perimeter. 2 will come from the east. They are testing for weakness." Iron Hawk's eyes flicked toward her, a spark of surprise and then approval. "You see well," he said, almost a whisper, but it carried through the heavy air. "Good. That awareness could save lives." The words, simple as they were, felt like a bridge, connecting them across fear, strategy, and the unspoken thread of trust that had formed in the minutes and hours since they had met. The riders surged forward suddenly, a calculated move meant to intimidate, to force a reaction. Iron Hawk sprang into action, a blur of motion, every step precise, every decision measured. Ilara followed instinctively, her own movements guided by his lead. She felt the heat of battle, the tension of strategy, and the electric pull of being at his side, a witness and participant in something far greater than herself. In the chaos she glimpsed a softer side of him, fleeting and almost imperceptible. A glance at her as he moved, a protective arc of his body that shielded her from danger, a brush of fingers that lingered longer than necessary. Each gesture, tiny and human, spoke of the growing bond between them, a connection forged under fire, danger, and the stark beauty of the plains. The riders faltered briefly, thrown off by their coordinated counter, and in that heartbeat Ilara felt a surge of exhilaration. They were not just surviving, they were asserting control, proving that instinct, courage, and trust could match raw power. Yet, the threat had not ended. The band of riders remained a shadow over the fort, a reminder that the outside world was unpredictable. that danger could erupt at any moment, and that the bond between her and Iron Hawk would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. A hawk cried from above again, slicing across the sky, and Alara felt a shiver of recognition. It was as if the bird mirrored the tension, the freedom, and the watchfulness that defined Iron Hawk. She realized then that this was more than strategy, more than survival. It was a dance between two souls, a weaving of courage, desire, and mutual respect that neither had expected, yet both had embraced. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifting, and the riders regrouped for another approach. Iron Hawk's eyes darkened, and his posture became even more rigid. "They are clever," he muttered. "But we are sharper, and they do not know the depth of what binds us here." Ilara's pulse raced. The words carried multiple layers: danger, trust, connection, and she felt them settle deep within her chest. She had come to understand that Iron Hawk was not just a warrior to be feared, but a man whose heart, though guarded, was capable of profound loyalty and, perhaps, affection. She dared a glance at him and saw a flicker of something she had never seen in anyone before, a quiet acknowledgement of their growing bond, tempered by the knowledge of the dangers that still surrounded them. The riders advanced again, closer now, their intentions clear. Ilara's fingers hovered over the basin, not ready to retreat, not willing to break the fragile thread of connection they had formed. She could feel the rising tension in every breath, every heartbeat, every glance exchanged with Iron Hawk. This was the precipice, the moment before resolution, the point at which courage, love, and trust would either falter or ignite into something unforgettable. And then the first rider drew near enough that Alara could see the glint of metal and the shadow of intent in their posture. Iron Hawk shifted, coiling like a panther, and she felt the electric charge of anticipation, of danger, and of something more intimate, more profound than mere survival. She realized that this was the climax approaching, the point where everything they had built, everything they had dared to trust in one another, would be tested against the raw unpredictability of the world outside. Her gaze met his, and in that suspended heartbeat, she knew that nothing could prepare her for what was about to unfold. Every choice, every movement, every instinct mattered. The moment stretched, heavy with tension, with desire, and with the unspoken promise that, no matter what happened, this connection, this bond would leave a mark neither of them could forget. Ilara took a slow breath, steadying herself against the thrum of danger, and felt Iron Hawk's presence anchor her. She knew that whatever came next would demand everything: courage, intelligence, trust, and a willingness to step into the unknown with the man who had captured not just her attention, but something far deeper within her heart. The riders were almost upon them now, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between Alara and Iron Hawk. The sun blazed overhead. Shadows stretched long, and the wind carried the scent of dust, danger, and something untold. The stage was set, the tension at its peak, and the story that had begun with a simple order to bathe a warrior was now a story of hearts, courage, and the impossible anticipation of what might come next. In that frozen, electric moment, Alara understood one thing with absolute certainty: the climax of their journey was here. And whether they survived, triumphed, or fell, the connection between them, fiery, fragile, and utterly unbreakable, would define everything that followed. The dust of the plains hung heavy in the air, settling slowly as the distant riders slowed and began to retreat, their intentions thwarted by the unexpected strength and coordination of Iron Hawk and the fort's defenders. Ilara's chest heaved with exertion and relief, her fingers still brushing the warm water in the basin, now almost forgotten. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and saw not just victory in those dark, piercing eyes, but a depth of feeling she had not dared to hope for. Iron Hawk approached slowly, each step measured, yet with a softness she had not seen in him before. His gaze lingered on her face, noting the sweat on her brow, the determination in her stance, and the quiet courage that had guided her through the tension, the danger, and the fear. "You did well," he said, his voice low but carrying warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. "Far better than I expected." Ilara's lips curved into a tentative smile. "I only followed your lead," she replied, though she knew it was more than that. She had faced the unknown, tested her instincts, and in doing so had discovered a strength within herself that she had never fully known. Standing here with him, she understood that courage could be shared, trust could be built, and hearts could be found in the most unexpected places. Ironhawk's gaze softened, and for the first time he let a small, genuine smile touch his lips. It was fleeting, yet it carried a weight that made Alara's chest tighten. "And yet, you have taught me something too," he said, almost quietly, as if admitting it to himself. "Even a warrior such as I can learn trust, even hope, from another soul." Alara felt her heart stir at his words. There had been tension, fear, and the unspoken pull between them from the very beginning, and now, in the quiet aftermath of danger, that pull became undeniable. She stepped closer, drawn not just by curiosity or fascination, but by the knowledge that something rare and true had begun here, in the shadow of the fort under the open sky of the plains. The fort slowly came back to life around them. Soldiers returned to their routines, the distant cries of hawks and the wind through the mesas filling the spaces that danger had carved out. Yet Alara and Ironhawk remained in their own bubble of stillness, a shared moment that neither orders nor stories could define. She realized that the command to bathe him, once seemingly mundane, had become the catalyst for something far greater in understanding, a bond, a shared experience that transcended fear and legend. He extended a hand, rough from years of battles and survival, yet steady and warm. Alara hesitated just a moment before taking it, letting their fingers intertwine in a simple gesture that spoke volumes. There were no words needed, no declarations, only the silent acknowledgement that they had found something rare, a connection forged in courage, trust, and quiet intimacy. The riders had disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind only the faint disturbance in the grass and the knowledge that danger always lingered in the world beyond the fort. But here, in this moment, it no longer mattered. Alara could feel it in her bones, the sense that she had stepped into a story larger than herself, a story where love, courage, and destiny intertwined like the rivers cutting through the mesas. Ironhawk's eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat the world beyond the fort vanished. He leaned closer, a subtle, careful movement, as if testing the boundaries of trust, and she felt the warmth of his presence envelop her. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," he murmured, the intensity in his gaze softened by a tenderness that caught her off guard. "And perhaps that is why I cannot turn away." Ilara's heart beat faster, her thoughts quieting under the force of emotion. She had been afraid, exhilarated, and captivated from the moment she first saw him, yet now, standing here after the trials of danger, she realized that what she felt was far deeper than fascination. It was respect, trust, and the quiet unfolding of something that could grow into love, born not from ease but from shared courage and shared vulnerability. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the fort and the plains. Alara glanced at the basin, now still, and then back at Ironhawk. They had faced danger together, survived it, and in the process discovered a bond that neither orders nor legends could diminish. Every ripple in the water, every brush of his hand, every glance exchanged had become part of a story that belonged only to them. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and Alara felt a sense of peace she had not known before. The world remained vast, wild, and unpredictable, but here, beside him, she had found a measure of certainty. Ironhawk's presence grounded her, not by force, but by the quiet strength and loyalty he offered without demand. He stepped closer again, careful and deliberate, and she met him halfway. Their hands brushed once more, lingered longer this time, and in that simple touch, the unspoken promise of something lasting passed between them. It was not a declaration of tomorrow, but a recognition that whatever the future held, they would face it together, strengthened by trust, courage, and the rare discovery of hearts aligned. "Do you know," Ironhawk said softly, "how rare it is to meet someone who can see beyond the armor, beyond the legend, into the heart?" His dark eyes searched hers, filled with quiet admiration and a flicker of vulnerability. Alara's breath caught. "I think," she whispered, "that sometimes the heart sees what the eyes cannot. And maybe it knows what courage truly is?" He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. For a moment they simply stood there, the basin of water between them now a symbol not of duty, but of the trust and intimacy they had discovered. Around them, the fort returned to life, but the world beyond seemed almost secondary to the quiet bond that had grown stronger through tension, danger, and shared humanity. As the sun sank behind the mesas, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, Ilara felt the stirrings of hope and possibility. She had entered this story with orders, with fear, and with duty, but she emerged with understanding, courage, and a heart awakened by a man who was fierce, untamed, and yet capable of tenderness she had never imagined. Ironhawk looked at her, and in that gaze was a promise, not of perfection, but of presence. "We have survived this day," he said, voice low but filled with warmth. "And perhaps that is enough to start something new." Ilara nodded, feeling a quiet joy and relief wash over her. "Yes," she said. "Enough to begin," the wind whispered through the fort, carrying with it the distant sounds of life returning, of normalcy creeping back into the wild, rugged land. And yet the bond between them remained unshaken, a flame that had been sparked by fear, courage, and the gentle unfolding of trust. They walked slowly together toward the edge of the fort, hands brushing, hearts beating in a rhythm neither had known before. The world was vast, the future uncertain, but in that moment there was connection, love, and the knowledge that together they could face anything. The riders, the danger, the orders, they were all part of a past that had tested them, but it could not touch the bond they had forged in fire, water, and shared courage. As the sky deepened into the soft purples and pinks of dusk, Ilara looked at Ironhawk and saw not just the warrior, but the man beneath the strength, the heart, and the rare, unspoken tenderness that had drawn her from the very beginning. And in his eyes she saw a reflection of herself, fearless, determined, and ready to embrace whatever life offered, side by side. The sun disappeared behind the mesas, leaving only the soft glow of evening, and the fort quieted into the rhythm of night. Ilara and Ironhawk stood together, two hearts that had discovered something precious, rare and enduring in the midst of chaos and challenge. They did not need words, declarations, or promises. What they had found was enough a connection born of trust, courage, and love that had been tested, tempered, and proven true. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, shimmering over the endless plains, Ilara felt a sense of completion and anticipation all at once. The danger had passed, the lessons had been learned, and the bond they had forged promised a future filled with courage, love, and adventure. Together they had faced the fiercest storms of both land and heart, and together they would walk into whatever came next, stronger, united, and unafraid. In the quiet of the plains, beneath the vast, endless sky, two souls had found one another, and in that discovery lay the truest victory of all.